Paul, let's start with the biggest piece of news since Thursday's program ended, and that, of course, is James Bradberry is not going to be available for Sunday's game. He was determined based on the fact that he had an interaction with somebody outside of the facility that he would be high risk. So as a result, he has to quarantine and is not going to be able to play on Sunday. Head coach Joe Judge spoke to the media earlier today. He indicated that he utilized the chiropractor outside of the facility. He didn't go against team rules or anything like that. They're not putting the blame on Bradberry, but because of rules and protocols that are in place governing the coronavirus, unfortunately, they're not going to have him at their disposal, and he's been by far the most consistent weapon within the secondary this season.
Lance, unless I misunderstood, Judge said that the chiropractor was working with another team, which is why Bradberry assumed that the chiropractor was being tested for the coronavirus on a daily basis. That clearly did not turn out to be the case, and so what Joe Judge said is that, they've advised all their players and all their personnel, talk to our medical staff. We'll get somebody tested and in our enclosed system, in our bubble, so to speak, so that if you do need some type of treatments, we can get them for you and bring somebody within our pseudo bubble, if you will. And so, unfortunately, there was an assumption made that because that chiropractor was working with another NFL team, I don't know who else it could be besides somebody close, but because of that, there was a mistake made. So it's unfortunate because they certainly could use him against Cleveland.
Well, there's no doubt about it, especially with the way that this Cleveland offense is performing. They're very strong in terms of their ground attack. They're top 3 in all the major categories when it comes to the ground, yardage per game as well as yardage per carry and total carries, the volume, which is key. They don't want Baker Mayfield to throw the ball 30-some-odd times. They want to be able to pound it with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and the secondary is key in terms of slowing that down. It's not just, Paul, about the guys up front. It's also about the ability of the corners and the safeties to come up and prevent guys like Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt from getting that yak, yardage after the catch or yardage after the initial contact. So, when we talk about, well, this is going to be a physical game, yes, they're going to have to win the battle in the trenches, but stopping the run, the way you do that effectively is also because of the assistance and help from your secondary.
Well, let's make something very, very, very clear. James Bradberry is a physical corner who is not afraid to come up and stop the run. And when you look at what the Browns do, they love, despite the fact that Chubb is a bruiser, they love to run to the outside. In fact, specifically, they love to run left and take that ball outside to the left, out to the sideline or off tackle, if you will. Now, there's no doubt Hunt, with his speed and his quicks, would be the guy who is more likely to run that kind of play. The problem is, if you don't stop him quickly, it's a 30-yard run. I mean, he's just, boom, he's gone. And before you know it, he's into your third level of defense, and you've got to wonder if you're going to be able to stop him from scoring a touchdown. So, yeah, it is important that your corners provide some run support against a team that is able to utilize that outside running game.
Now, as far as, how do you fill in the void left behind by a guy like Bradberry? They have options. Logan Ryan, remember, can be moved between safety and corner. They still have Isaac Yiadom in the mix, who's been a guy running on the opposite side. Julian Love is somebody that's interchangeable in terms of both positions. Montre Hardage, who they recently added to the active roster from the practice squad, he's another guy that has experience at corner and safety. So they have some versatility, and that's probably what they're going to have to do. But I want to add another layer to this, Paul, because it's not just about losing Bradberry. Remember, Darnay Holmes did not play in Sunday's game against the Cardinals because of a knee injury. Now, they didn't practice yesterday because Jason Garrett, obviously, with him testing positive, they wanted out of precaution to make sure that there wasn't interaction amongst the team. So yesterday was more of a mental day. They had Zoom meetings and so forth. But Holmes, it was estimated, did not practice yesterday, and he did not practice on Wednesday. Today will be another indication, but right now, I would say, Paul, it's trending towards Holmes could very well miss his second straight games, which means you're not just down one of your outside corners, you're also down your slot guy, and then it becomes more of a game of chess between who you're going to move to the inside. You're going to move Logan Ryan into the slot? Okay, well, that means now there's an opening at safety, and now Xavier McKinney, who probably played the more snaps than he ever played in the last game, is now probably going to have to take on a more significant role. So my point is, it's a domino effect. It's more of an issue if you're down Bradberry and Holmes as opposed to just one of the two.
Well, I'm going to give you another possible alignment here, all right? If McKinney goes, let's say, into the slot to take Holmes' position, which he saw a lot of time in last week, and you move Logan Ryan outside to the boundary corner, okay? Now you've got Love and you've got Peppers at the safety spots. And don't forget Adrian Colbert, okay, because he was designated to practice and has actually come back now off injured reserve. Colbert was getting some time in that three-safety package earlier this season before he went down with injury. So I think his coming back to the lineup could actually factor into this Rubik's Cube that the Giants are going to have to utilize in their secondary.
There's going to be a lot of guys that they're going to probably mix and match, especially since you now lose, once again, your security blanket in James Bradberry, because when Bradberry's on the field, he takes a lot off the plate of the rest of the guys. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Patrick Graham attacks this Cleveland offense, specifically the receivers, because, Jarvis Landry is a dangerous weapon. Rashard Higgins has made plays, and the tight ends could create some headaches too. But before we get more into the matchup, Patrick Graham did speak to the media earlier today, and right off the top, he was asked about how does now not having Bradberry in the equation impact your defensive alignment?
The thing about this game, and you get used to it over the years, you lose guys, whether it's injuries or other things, it's definitely going to be tough when James will be missed. But, he's in meetings in terms of, over Zoom and, staying active and staying involved. So it's going to be tough, but we got to adjust, because I know this. Here's the problem is that Cleveland doesn't care. So we got, they can care less, and we got to get ready to go. So, that's on us to figure it out. But I know the players will rally behind it. I know James will be pushing for us and cheering us on. So it's a unique challenge, but not unique. Let me stop saying it's not really unique, but it's a challenge, and we're ready to go face it.
Well, and that's what life in the NFL has been all season long. You never know when you're going to lose a guy. You never know when you're going to lose a coordinator. And the Giants were hit in both of those entities. So I think like anything else, this is why you prepare accordingly in training camp and throughout the season. Hey, if we lose player A, how do we then go about making sure that we're not going to drop off on the defensive side of things? But it's not just about, well, who are you going to match up with the wide receivers? To me, the three tight ends, and even Graham talked about this, Paul, this is an offense where Austin Hooper is expected to return this week. He's been banged up. Then you have Harrison Bryant, the young tight end, who's a very big target. And then, of course, David Njoku. So they'll utilize all three of those guys as blockers, as well as guys that could be big targets in the red zone and open up the middle of the field. So the secondary, not only do you have to worry about the physicality of Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, but you also have to worry about making sure that these tight ends don't become real big headaches all throughout the course of the game, because they're more than capable of moving the chains with just their tight ends alone before we even start to talk about the wide receiving core.
Well, you've just indicated another situation that opens up another possibility for the Giants, because maybe they decide, instead of going with the heavy secondary and, using a lot of nickel, a lot of dime, maybe even some quarters, maybe all of a sudden now this is an opportunity, because we've seen how well Carter Coughlin has done, substituting the last couple of weeks for Fackrell on the edge, right? And we've seen Blake Martinez was able to play through a sore back last weekend against the Cardinals, and he got through it okay. Well, maybe, instead of going dime, maybe the Giants decide, you know what? We're not really happy with our depth in the secondary. I don't think they want to put Nate Ebner out there again in the regular defense. We saw some of that earlier this year. It did not work out so well. I'd like to try to just keep him on specials. Maybe you use Tay Crowder or Cam Brown as somebody who's going to cover up a tight end instead of going with the extra defensive back. If you think that Brown's length can do that, if you think that Crowder's athleticism can do that, these are all the squares on the Rubik's Cube, that Coach Graham has to decide, all right, what do we like? Is that matchup better than that matchup? If we do this, are we giving up that? There are some options here. I do like the fact that the Giants have gotten enough of playing time scattered around with all of these younger, inexperienced players, in that they're not going to be thrown into the deep end of the water without having some experience. I think it's important that Crowder has played some, Coughlin has played some, Brown has played some. This was all part, I think, of Judge's master strategy from the beginning, that you want to wean these young guys in week by week, giving them a taste so that if you get into a spot where you desperately need them in an emergency, they're not going to be thrown out into the cold.
I agree with you. It has not been a baptism by fire scenario for most of these young players because they've been exposed to some snaps here or there. Maybe the volume hasn't been high, but they've at least gotten some playing time in the early weeks. I think that's been well documented. The tight ends, by the way, have accounted for 7 of the 24 receiving touchdowns for the Browns this season. So you do the math, that's 1/3 of their touchdowns has been courtesy of Hooper, Bryant, as well as Njoku. And that's more of a reason why the Giants need to be aware of these guys. And remember, it was Dan Arnold that made that great grab for the Arizona Cardinals, and he was a guy that was starting to come along lately for Arizona. They were increasing his snaps. They were increasing how they utilize him in the playbook. It's a copycat league. I guarantee you Baker Mayfield's going to take notice of whether or not in the red zone the Giants have been able to shore up some of those issues as they now look to slow down this Cleveland Browns offense. Speaking of the offensive side of the ball, I want to switch gears here because in addition to the loss of Bradberry, the other prevalent storyline is the fact that Jason Garrett will not be on the field Sunday calling plays because he tested positive for the coronavirus. So as a result, Freddie Kitchens is going to step in for him. And Freddie Kitchen spoke to the media earlier today. The one thing I want to make clear here, Paul, the assumption in general that I think is often made when a new play caller comes in, that all of a sudden the Giants or any other team is going to have the ability to revamp their entire offense in the span of 48 hours, which I think as far from the truth as humanly possible. Just because the play caller changes doesn't mean the offense changes. Garrett's been involved in Zoom meetings. Joe Judge made that clear. He's still heavily invested in the game plan. The only thing that's different is Kitchens is going to be responsible for calling the plays. Now, does that mean that Kitchens, based on how he sees the game, Paul, could lean on the pass a little bit more than the run or vice versa? Absolutely. I'm not saying that the flow of the game is not going to change. But what I don't expect is Kitchens is not coming in and now he's not going to run the offense he ran with Cleveland last year, okay? You don't implement that in the span of 3 days. It's just not going to happen. So the flow of the game could maybe change, but the overall structure of the offense is going to remain in place based on what Jason Garrett implemented going back to training camp.
I couldn't agree with you more, Lance. I think there is much to do being made about nothing with this. We all understand that the Giants coaching staff from the very beginning, as per Coach Joe Judge, has actually taken turns at practice of calling plays. He purposely decided that because of the pandemic, there may be a case where he's going to lose one of his staff members, specifically one of his coordinators. So he said all along that it's been a cooperative effort. Guys have shared information. They have collaborated. They have taken turns. I get the impression that it doesn't just go down 1 or 2. I get the impression that almost every staff member has at least had a turn at doing some of this stuff. Because Joe Judge said with this pandemic, we had to be prepared for every single emergency imaginable. And this comes from the whole Belichick-Saban, tree, where you better make sure that you have thought of everything that can go wrong before it goes wrong. And so credit to Joe Judge for that. And because of his implementation of this style of and philosophy of going forward, I think the Giants are in a very good position with Freddie Kitchens. Look, he has coached every position on offense except for the offensive line, okay, during the course of his career. He has also specifically been a coordinator as well as a head coach. I don't think there's going to be much of a change at all. I think putting Freddie Kitchens in the offensive coordinator's headset on Sunday is a seamless deal. It's not worth a story. It's worth the mention, obviously. You got to mention it. But it's not worth the story that so many people want to make out of it. There is no huge difference that's going to be found. There's no magical potion that's going to suddenly get the Giants 45 points either.
Well, I'll give you an example. Greg Olson, the Raiders offensive coordinator, last night was unavailable because of also COVID protocol. So John Gruden took over the play calling. Now, he's the head coach, and he also obviously has been a play caller throughout the course of his career. Now, with that being said, Paul, they had a change at quarterback very early in that game last night because Derek Carr wound up straining his groin. So Marcus Mariota came in, and Mariota is, I would argue, a little bit more mobile and a threat to run than Derek Carr. So, yeah, the offense changed a little bit, but I think that was more a product of the personnel.
Yeah.
But Gruden has been around because Olsen's the guy he hired. So they didn't all of a sudden dig deep into their bag of tricks, and Gruden is running flea flickers, or he's having Darren Waller play quarterback, or some ridiculous concoction of offensive game planning. But the personnel does dictate to a certain degree some changes, but overall the Raiders stuck to what the Raiders have been doing all season long.
Look, let's remember something, Lance. Freddie Kitchens and Joe Judge go back decades.
Yeah.
Decades.
They go back to Mississippi.
Yeah, well, Mississippi State.
Yeah.
They're not newbies, okay? Trust me. There's symmetry between how these guys think. And oh, by the way, there's also that coaching tree that we talk about all the time. The cross-pollination of the trees between the Patriots and, of course, even Saban, where Garrett was the quarterback's coach for Nick Saban with the Miami Dolphins. Okay? If anything, Joe Judge is probably even more in symmetry and more in step with Freddie Kitchens than he was with Jason Garrett. And that's not to say they weren't in step, because I believe that they were. But to think that this is going to be any type of change is just, it's foolish fodder for people to write about. That's all it is.
Well, they have a history together, as you pointed out. So I do think that makes for a smooth transition. But I want to take it a step further here. I think big picture perspective, what this situation has showed, and we talked a lot about this, Paul, in the offseason. When Joe Judge put this staff together, he brought in a lot of former head coaches and play callers. And we talk about the depth of a playing roster, okay? Well, meaning if you lose a corner, who could step in? What gets overlooked, especially during a global pandemic, is, God forbid, you lose coordinators. And we also talked about these scenarios. Who can you have to come in? And Freddie Kitchens was a name because he previously called plays. But they also have Derek Dooley's on staff, Paul, the senior offensive assistant. He's also a former positional coach, former head coach. He also called plays when he was at Missouri. Then you take into consideration how other things get impacted. Well, Freddie Kitchens talked about this when he met with the media earlier. Bobby Blick, who's an offensive quality control coach, he has been working with him in coaching up the tight ends. So if Freddie then has to focus on the offense and calling plays, he can rely on Bobby Blick then handling the tight ends because he's been with him in a lot of the meetings. So they planned accordingly, but I think they had a good structure in place because they had a lot of coaches that previously ran their own ship, steered their own ship, Paul. So the adjustment is not like, oh, my God, what am I doing? I've never been exposed to this,
right,
since they've been in those scenarios before.
To me, about the only worthwhile mention about this storyline at all, to be frank with you, is Joe Judge did make it clear that because of the electronic prohibitions put in place by the league, coaches are not allowed to have cell phones either in the box or on the sidelines. They cannot communicate, outside of what their staff cocoon is, that Jason Garrett, who's going to be home watching the game, okay, let's understand that. Obviously, he's going to watch the game. Well, if he's got some thoughts as to what he's seeing away from the stadium, he's not in a position to text anybody or to make a phone call or to Zoom in at halftime. The only legitimate story here is to let people know that as the offensive coordinator, Jason Garrett is on his own in his house watching the game with no contact permitted with Giants staff personnel during the course of the game. So it's not like he can see something and dial up Freddie or dial up somebody else and say, hey, I got an idea here. You want to try it? It was a worthwhile question to ask, but that's the only piece of news here out of this whole storyline.
Yeah, because that would be a violation of NFL rules. So they have to stick with the staff members that are on the field in order to make the necessary adjustments. However, Garrett will be involved in the game planning leading up to the game because he will be taking part in Zoom meetings. So when they meet today, he'll be part of it. Saturday, part of it. Once all of a sudden the clock strikes 8:20 on Sunday, then all of a sudden communication gets cut off with Jason Garrett.